have learned about three theories of capital structure and the optimal capital structure. That is four theories, four different formulas, right? The main emphasis on this is that you have to know which one do you have to use to solve the problem as a given in the problem, right? So if we take a look at the Modigliani and Miller with no tax, this formula was invented in 1958. Okay? Modigliani and Miller discovered this formula in 1958, where we haven't had any ways to measure the firm's equity stock risk measures as beta. Beta was measured by Sharpe and Lintner in 1968, so it hasn't been invented yet. In 1960s is when the Sharpe and Lintner basically invented the measure of beta for NCAPM, capital asset pricing model. So in 1958, we have no measure of beta. Therefore, Modigliani and Miller used this formula. In 1963, Modigliani and Miller with corporate tax. Also, we haven't discovered the measure of beta for stock. So therefore, they only say, well, let's adjust it with the after-tax cost of debt. Okay? So if you're given the corporate tax and you're not given the beta, then you have to use Modigliani and Miller with corporate tax. If you're not given the corporate tax, then you have to go back to the first formula, which is Modigliani and Miller with zero tax. Now, Miller with the investor personal tax was invented in 1977. And basically, this is after the beta is invented, right? But Merton Miller basically said, let's continue on our work from the Modigliani and Miller with corporate tax by incorporating personal taxes instead of adjusting the beta. So in 1977, this is where Miller invented or discovered this formula of personal taxes. And then if we look at the optimal capital structure with the Hamada equation in 1970s, it's 1972, that's after the discovery of the Sharpe and Lintner beta measure. So therefore, Robert Hamada said that we have discovered the measure of the firm's equity risk measure, relative risk measure, which is beta. Therefore, we can adjust the beta. Instead of adjusting this debt to equity ratio, the cost of debt through the Modigliani and Miller, we can directly adjust the cost of equity through the measure of beta. So, in short, if you're given the beta measure, then you have to use the Hamada equation. If you're given the risk-free and market risk premium on the problem, that means you have to use this Hamada equation. If you're not given the beta, then you have to go back to the Modigliani and Miller or Miller with personal taxes. In the Miller with personal taxes, you have to be given the tax for the stock investment and the tax for debt investment, right? That has to be given in the problem, or at least the investor has to know that. If you're not acknowledging that, then we go back to the Modigliani and Miller with corporate tax, which we have to know the corporate tax. If we don't know the corporate tax, then we have to go back to the Modigliani and Miller with zero tax. So therefore, it's clear with this three theory of capital structure and the optimal capital structure, we know the timeline differences between the Modigliani and Miller in 1958 and 1972 of Hamada's is due to the fact that Sharpe and Lintner basically invented the beta and CAPM in 1968. So before 1968, we cannot measure the firm's risk through beta, and therefore Modigliani and Miller don't use the beta at all, right? So is Miller. They don't use the beta at all. But then after the innovation of beta measure in 1968, which is 1972 Hamada equations, use the beta measure and use the capital asset pricing model, or CAPM. So we hope that we know the distinction between all these three theories and the optimal capital structure. Yeah.